Hello, thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The Last Voyage of the Demeter, directed by Andre Overdahl, released in 2023. And it is based on a chapter from Dracula by Bram Stoker, released in 1897. So yeah, like I just said, this is based on a chapter from Dracula, and it is the chapter that documents when Dracula is traveling by ship from Transylvania to England. They are unknowingly transporting him and his boxes of dirt, and as the voyage goes on, the crew is picked off one by one. And I have read Dracula. I read it back in 2019, so I am familiar with the overall story, but that was 4 years ago, and so when I went back to reread this section of the book in preparation for the movie, it just brought back to me how great this book is. And this was like a short section. It probably took me like 15 minutes to read it, but it has just such great imagery and is so atmospheric, and it is just like so creepy and eerie and just so well written. And by the way, all of Dracula is written in like diary form or letters. And so this is like the captain's log. So it's like his diary, which is found after the ship has like crashed onto shore. So yeah, reading this section of the book definitely made me want to go back and read the book all the way through. So prepare yourselves for an upcoming Dracula Bookverse movie. I have not done one yet, so I will probably end up releasing that video in October, which of course will be very fitting. And then my spoiler-free movie review. I went into this movie expecting just like a middle-of-the-road vampire movie, and that's basically what I got. Like, there wasn't anything here that really surprised me. We do get some really good suspenseful, tense, creepy moments, and there are some specific scenes I will be talking about that I think were just so well done and so effective. But at the end of the day, there just wasn't anything about this that made it stand out. And the ending also just seemed too forced, which we will get into when I get into spoilers. And then along with the ending, like I said, it just feels forced and like spoon feeding us. The beginning also is kind of spoon feeding us because we literally have text on screen right at the beginning of the movie explaining like, oh, the Demeter is a crashed ship that was found on the shores of England, and this is the story of its crew. And by the way, this is taken from a chapter of Dracula. And I feel like none of that needed to be told to us. Like, one, the fact that it's from Dracula, they don't say the name Dracula until probably like halfway through the story. But like, we don't need to know that this is even from Dracula. Like, we'll see that it's a vampire as the movie goes on. Meaning, like, if people go into this blind, not having seen a trailer or anything, like, I feel like you could enjoy the movie just as it goes along and as the story unfolds. Like, you don't need to tell us right up front what the story is about and where it comes from. Like, I just thought it wasn't necessary. And then I will say this movie was pretty graphic at times, and not gonna lie, there were moments where I just had to look down because it was a bit too much for me, so I will give a heads up to those who maybe are a bit more sensitive to that as well. But even though I know I'm kind of saying a lot of negative things or things that I personally just didn't love about this movie, there were things I did like I said, so I will be getting into those in the spoiler section. So I think, yeah, it was just like your average vampire movie, nothing too special, but it also wasn't terrible either. And I do love the ship's setting, so I really like that, and I really like just that they turned this part of the book into a movie to begin with, because it is such a cool section of the book, and like, it's just so exciting and so tense and just so well written. And so it's cool to see this section on screen, because this is a part of the Dracula story that I feel like is glossed over in all Dracula movies, right? Like, they don't bother talking about the ship. And so it is cool that this part of the story got its own movie. But from here on out, I will be getting into the details of the plot, which means I will be getting into spoilers. So for starters, I want to talk about how, this is a short story, essentially. It's based on just a short section. And so this is one of those cases where the movie adds a lot more than what was in the original text. And so we have a lot more characters in the movie than we did in the book. So our main character is Clemens, who is a doctor who gets a job, on this ship for the duration of this voyage. And he was not in the book. We also have Toby, who is the captain's grandson, who is 8 years old, who is also there. He is not in the book. And then Anna, a woman who was found on board, again, not in the book. And then the movie also has the added element of the captain telling his first mate, like, this is going to be my last voyage, and after this I'm retiring and the ship will be yours. And that plot as well was also not in the book. And so to talk about Clemens first, so he is played by Corey Hawkins, and like, he did the best he could with what he had, I would say. He has a couple of monologues though that are kind of cheesy, and his character is also the type where it's like, I don't believe in superstition and I believe in science and facts. And that kind of a character, like that trope, is so overdone, and we get one in like every single kind of movie like this, like every horror movie, every supernatural movie. They're like, I don't believe in the supernatural, I believe in facts and reality and science. And it's just kind of a cliche character that I get tired of seeing. Like, I get they have a character like that in every movie because in real life there would be people like that, right? Who are just like refusing to believe. So I get why it's always included. And then obviously that character always has the arc where they end up realizing that the supernatural being is real after all, you know? So I guess they like the arc a character like that gets. But then he also has this monologue where they're saying like, oh, what are you going to do with your money? Because, by the way, Dracula, they don't know it's Dracula, but he paid them like a ton of money. They're getting a huge bonus in order to get this cargo to England faster. So the sooner they get it there, the more the money they get paid. And so this was really smart on Dracula's part because one, he's crazy rich. He doesn't care about money. But two, he's not going to have to pay them because he knows they'll all be dead. And three, this prevents them from wanting to make any stops. So even when people start disappearing or whatever, they're like, well, we can't make any stops. We're going to lose our bonus. We need to get there as soon as possible. So he knows that money is a big motivator and it will just ensure their own demise ultimately. But anyway, so they're asking like, you know, they're talking about what are you going to do with the money? And he's like, oh, like what I want, money can't buy. Like I want to understand the purpose of this life. Well, he doesn't quite say that. He's like, I want to understand the meaning and the reasons of life and why people are the way they are. And that's something that you can't find out with money, essentially. And then later on, we hear his backstory about how he was one of the first Black men to graduate from Cambridge Medical School. However, once he graduated, no one would hire him because of the color of his skin. And so we find out that, you know, that racism that he has dealt with is part of the reason why he just like doesn't understand the world and it doesn't make sense to him, like why people would be this way. And then this ties into Dracula because once they realize, you know, there's some kind of strange creature on board, he's like, you know, just like I need to understand the bad out in the world, I need to understand this thing and figure out like what it is and why it does what it does. And like his backstory, I liked that and it really added to his character, but I think it was just like a poorly written script at times because some of the dialogue, like I liked what they were going for. I just didn't always think it was well executed, which talk about cheesy because then at the very end, he is thinking how like, you know, I've seen the evil in this world, but now I've also seen the good and the good people that there are, meaning, you know, the different people that he met on the Demeter. And he's like, you know, drawing a picture of Anna. And so it was just so cliche and so cheesy. And again, just poorly written in my mind. But I do want to say, Corey Hawkins, he does do a good British accent. As I was watching this movie, I was like, oh, I guess he's British. And I just didn't realize that because he just does American accents in what I've seen him in. But then I looked him up afterwards and he is from the US. So he just does a really good British accent. I'm always impressed when an American can do a good accent. And I mean, I'm not British. Maybe a British person would be more picky, but I thought he did a good job. And then I want to talk about Toby, who, like I said, is the 8-year-old grandson to the captain. And I thought like his character was fine. And I thought the child actor did a good job. And he actually has like one of my favorite segments in the movie, which is when he's like in the captain's quarters and then he hears something and he leaves and he sees this guy who had been attacked by Dracula and he has now like become a vampire himself. But Toby doesn't initially know this. And so then we have this suspenseful chase scene as he's trying to get back to the captain's lodge or captain's quarters, whatever. And then once he's in there, the guy starts trying to break into the room. And then like people come and like help him with that guy. But then he sees that Dracula is in there in the cabin's room with him. And so like that whole segment was just so well done and so tense and so creepy and so suspenseful. And one of those times where like I was so tense, but didn't realize it until it was over. And then I was like, oh, like, wow. And by the way, Dracula ends up killing Toby. So, which wasn't too surprising. I mean, it is surprising because he's a child, but it's not too surprising because also, you know, from the start, and if this is going to be like the book, you know that everyone's going to end up dying, including the kid, which by the way, there is quite a bit of animals who die in this. Like we have a dog, a pig, a chicken, a goat. So there is a lot of that. So if you're sensitive to that, you might want to skip this one. And then another scene that was also really effective was, so first of all, the guy who became a vampire who was trying to get Toby, they bring him up to the top of the deck. And then when the sun comes out, he ends up like catching fire because he's a vampire. And so then later when they're going to toss Toby's body overboard, the grandpa thinks he's still alive. So they like unwrap the wrapping he's in. And then he tries to attack his grandpa, but then he also turns to fire because it's in the middle of the day. So both of those scenes were like very surprising and well done. And then to talk about Anna. So Anna was brought aboard by Dracula. She was in one of the boxes, and that is what he was going to live on during this voyage. But then they have some rough seas, and so the box she was in like cracks open and they find her. And then Clemens, he's a doctor, and so he does blood transfusions, and he gives her his own blood, and he does multiple transfusions. And so eventually she's well enough to, be up walking around and talking. And we find out that she is from the town that like lived in the shadow of Dracula's castle, so she knows about him and she's heard the lore. And then she also reveals how like she knows Dracula brought her aboard because she has all of these bite marks, which like Clemens is a doctor and he was helping her, but he must not have done a very thorough look because it was right there on her shoulder. Like he didn't even need to look far to see what her injuries were because it was right there. Also with the blood transfusion, it's kind of funny because it's like, is he a universal donor? Are they the same blood type? Like he also gives blood to Toby, I think too. Like, so it's like, does he just know their blood type? Like, but it didn't bother me too much in the movie though, because that's actually exactly how it is in the book Dracula. There's a character who gets blood from like 4 different people, and it's people like she knows who loves her. And like apparently Bram Stoker didn't know about blood types or something because it's just not discussed in that book, and people are sharing blood left and right and they're all fine. So it's just kind of a funny part of the book Dracula. And so again, in this movie, it's something that they also just kind of gloss over and don't get into. But anyway, Anna, the character, like she was fine. I thought the actress was good. And, like her and Clemens are kind of the 2 main characters in a way. Well, Clemens for sure. I guess she would be the second main character. But, like the captain and the first mate and then the guy who becomes a vampire, they do all have like fairly decent sized roles. But anyway, so I did enjoy her for the most part. And at the end, she realizes that she herself is going to turn into a vampire. And this is after she and Clemens have escaped. But she sacrifices herself instead and like sails off into the sun where she will end up burning. And then to talk about Dracula. So in this version, they made him look like the Nosferatu kind of Dracula, which it worked really well when we just see like glimpses of him, like when he, like it's just a brief flash, or like when he's like cowering in the corners or something. Like I feel like it's really effective in those times. But when you see him face on, I just wasn't loving the way he looked. Like the CGI was like okay, but I don't know, I just didn't love it when we saw him directly, and I found it almost less scary. Like it was scarier when we just saw glimpses, But like I said, in the book there is no Anna, and the movie makes it seem like the reason he attacked the crew was because they saved Anna. Had they not, like he would have just had Anna the whole time and the crew would have survived, maybe. Whereas in the book there is no Anna, and his plan was to use the crew, one by one until they got to England. And then like I said, there's also the animals as well, both book and movie, where the animals also die. But in the movie, I think in the book, the dog just like disappears. And that's how it is with all of the men, all of the crew. They just like disappear and they're just like, I don't know what happened to them. Whereas in the movie, like they see the evidence of something happening and they find the animals with these like huge gashes on them. And they are just like, oh, it must have been rabies, or it must have been like, they have these like logical explanations. And it's like, clearly something attacked them. Like, how can you convince yourself that this was like some medical disease or something? This is clearly an attack. But anyway, in the movie, like near the end, they plan to like crash the boat or the ship, and it will crash like with Dracula on it, and he will die and they will escape. However, this is when they realize Dracula can fly, which like totally ruins their plan, and they fail at it essentially. However, Clemens and Anna are able to jump overboard. But in the process, they do like pin Dracula, between these beams. However, once the ship crashes, Dracula is able to unpin himself and escape. Whereas in the book, the boat, like the ship, it like crashes ashore, and there's all these spectators watching it because it's so crazy. And after it crashes, they see this giant dog like run off and like go off into the woods. And that dog is Dracula, because in the book, Dracula can turn into like a wolf dog creature as well. And then also in the book, when they look at the ship, they see the captain, and he's dead, but he has tied himself to the wheel, and he has like a cross tied with his hands holding onto the wheel. And then in the captain's log, we read how like all of the crew has died, and then it's him and the first mate, and the first mate chooses to just jump overboard because he would rather drown. But the captain, he's like, I'm the captain. I can't abandon my ship, but I do want to save my soul, and I don't want this thing to kill me. So he uses the cross to help protect himself. And then it works because his body is still there, and he died just from the weather and everything. It wasn't from Dracula himself. And that's something the movie changed that I did not like, where crosses are useless against Dracula. Like, this isn't just some like random vampire story. Like, you're doing an adaptation of Dracula. Like, you gotta keep to the lore, right? And you can't just be like, suddenly now he's not bothered by that and it doesn't do anything to him. Like, no, like that's not the story. So it annoyed me that they made that change. And yeah, the ending of the movie. So Clemens, he had jumped overboard and he's eventually able to make it to shore and he's in England. And so we see him in England looking for Dracula. And in voiceover, he's saying like, I know it's here and I'm going to catch it no matter what I have to do, kind of a thing. And he's in a pub, you know, drawing a picture of Anna when like out of the corner of his eye. Well, he also hears like this sound from the ship that he knows, you know, is Dracula. So he sees Dracula like in a corner out of the corner of his eye. And then Dracula like rushes past him and just that whole scene, I just didn't like. Because one, in the narration, it's just like setting us up for a sequel. So they plan on making a follow-up, which like I'm fine with. Like, yeah, make a follow-up. But the way they like introduce the follow-up is just, again, just spoon feeding us. And it was just so obvious, like to the point where it just felt forced and weird. And then his brush with Dracula in the pub, I also didn't like. But there was a Letterboxd review who they said something like, you get to see Dracula in a top hat, so that's fun. Or something like that. Not Nosferatu in a top hat, because he still looks like Nosferatu, but he's like wearing a collar and a top hat. And so part of me was like, why? He can choose to look human. If he's out in public around people, he would be looking human right now. So yeah, that part I just didn't love. And yeah, I didn't talk about the book too much, but like I said, this is a short section. We just, you know, like I said, it's very well done. It's very eerie, where like the crew is, you know, unsteady and they feel that something's off, and then they slowly start disappearing and they get more fearful. And the first mate, he goes kind of crazy, and then he ends up like jumping overboard, like I said. And then we have the captain who ties himself to the wheel. And then, yeah, and then they're found on board. And then it's kind of funny because they're talking about the dog that ran off, and the person like is writing the newspaper article is saying how like the people are concerned and they want to find, you know, there's PETA who wants to find this dog and make sure he's okay, or the Humane Society or whatever. But they don't end up finding the dog, of course. And then also with the captain, they are like, some of them are like, the captain must have killed everyone. He was crazy. But then other people are like, no, like the captain was a good guy and he deserves like a good funeral. So they give him, you know, an honorable funeral. And then also in both, they make sure to deliver the cargo, because the cargo is still there. And so they make sure to deliver it, which of course the cargo is the boxes of soil from Transylvania, because they don't explain this in the movie, but in the book, he has to, when he like sleeps at night, he has to sleep in his own soil, like his own earth. And so that is why he has these boxes of dirt. And that's like a big part of the book, like near the end, is them like hunting down these boxes of dirt, because as long as Dracula has this dirt, he can survive. But anyway, yeah, so I guess that wraps it up for this one. When it comes to book versus movie, this is tough because it's just based on one chapter of the book. So am I doing like that chapter versus the movie? And if I'm comparing the whole book Dracula, like I feel like that's not fair because the movie isn't the whole book though. But ultimately, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know, because the movie also adds so much. And there were times where it kind of felt dragged out. And I don't know if this is the best way the chapter of this book could have been executed. Like, I feel like there's a better version of this that could have been done. But nonetheless, like I said, I think it's cool this chapter was adapted regardless. And yeah, like it was fine. And so ultimately, like, I'm not going to pick which one I prefer, because it's just, I feel like it's almost hard to compare the two. Like, part of me wants to say the book, but that's because I also just know everything that happens and where the book goes, you know? Whereas the ending of this movie, like I said, it's setting you up for more, but the way it did it was just poorly done, in my opinion. But anyway, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Let me know if you have seen this one. Let me know what you think of the book Dracula and if you have read it. I definitely recommend it. I'm really excited to dive back into that story. And I hope you guys liked how I dressed up for this. This is my like 1800s style gothic top that I wear. That seemed very fitting for this one. Like I said, Dracula will probably be coming in October is when I plan to do that episode. So don't forget to like and subscribe and comment your thoughts down below. And if you liked this one, I will link to my Frankenstein episode, because Frankenstein and Dracula, they're kind of similar, right? They're both like famous creature type monster stories, scary stories, Halloween. So anyway, I will link to Frankenstein if you want to check that one out. And yeah, I will see you next time. Bye.